now with our webinar. Welcome to the COVID-19 and ABE update. We have with us today staff from the Minnesota Department of Education, from Literacy Action Network, and from our Minnesota Adult Basic Education Distance Learning team. So we're each going to quickly introduce ourselves just very briefly, but my name is Brad Haskamp. I am the Adult Secondary Credential and Education Policy Specialist. Joined with me today is Todd. Todd, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. This is Todd Wagner. I am the State Director for Adult Basic Education.
Excellent. And Astrid?
This is Astrid Leiden, the Professional Development Specialist with the ABE team.
Excellent. And Jody?
Hi, this is Jody Versa. I'm the Program Quality Specialist on the team.
And Julie? Well, we'll move on. We couldn't hear Julie, but let's move on to Carla Vian. Carla Vian is providing our technical assistance, and we're very happy to have her here. She's with Literacy Action Network. And we also have Susan and Tom that are kind of dually representing Literacy Action Network and Literacy Minnesota's distance learning team. Let's get going. Oh, go ahead.
Just want to say hi, everyone. Thanks. Very glad to be here.
Thank you. Okay. So very similar to the last one, because we have a lot of content to walk through today, we are asking you to hold your questions until we get to the questions section of the session today. I recommend that maybe you write down, thanks to Brian suggested this, maybe you write down your comments on a piece of paper next to you or a device next to you, and enter those in the chat when we get into the Q&A section. That way we don't forget about your questions earlier on in the chat. Also, you could either chat them in when we get to the Q&A section, or you could also click on your little hand icon and raise your hand to raise your question over the phone, and we'll unmute you during that period. If you're having any technical assistance needs, please reach out to Carla Vian, and she'll be happy to help. We have 8 different topics that we're going to try to cover in the next hour and a half. In addition to updates and announcements, we'll talk about resources and professional development. We'll talk about distance learning, and Literacy Action Network has an update for us. We'll also be talking about some of our adult basic education grants, and we'll give you a brief partner update. Then we'll make sure we have time for you to discuss some ideas and positive practices that you're experiencing around the state. And of course, we hope to have plenty of time for questions today. Helpful to know that all of the resources from this webinar and from our earlier communications and webinars, they can be found at mnabe.org. If you click on State ABE Presentations, you can see the link right here. Also, just wanted to let you know that all of the slides for today's webinar are also in the materials section. If you click on materials, you can find the materials for today's session there. So let's launch first into our updates and announcements. So Todd, I'm going to have you unmute, and do you want to kick us off with some talk about the recent governor's executive orders?
Sure, thanks, Brad. So I'm sure, as all of you have heard and or read by now, yesterday afternoon, the governor issued 2 new executive directives, 2019 and 20-20. 2019 pertains to public schools and facilities, and as I'm sure you've heard, they will now be closed and operating strictly via distance learning until May 4th, and that applies to adult basic ed as well. And so we're going to have at least another 5 weeks or so to really work on honing our distance education skills. And I'm happy to say I'm hearing all kinds of great things from around the state about how well transitioning to doing work via distance ed is going. So the second directive, the 2020, was the stay-at-home directive. Just to point out that the termination date on that is different than the school distance learning. At the end of the day today, we go to a stay-at-home directive that extends until April 10th. And so that's a further directive for people to minimize time out of the house. People should be sheltering in place as much as possible. And really just to note that it's the 20-19 directive that's most critical for adult basic ed, indicating that we will be functioning via distance learning at least through May 4th. There may be some exceptions in correction settings, but otherwise, statewide, all programming should be taking place at a distance. If you are interested in more detail, you can see that the URL for the governor's executive orders is listed at the bottom of this slide. And as always, if you have any questions about how the various directives apply, feel free to contact me, and my contact information you can find on the MNAB website. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Todd. So we have also had some questions then specifically, not just ABE. Todd was clear about how that applies to ABE, but there are also questions that have been raised about what does that mean for GED testing. And so with the governor's executive order 2020, our understanding is then that Minnesota GED testing centers will be closed until at least April 10th. And we understand that there would be a potential exception with testing centers in corrections, especially the prisons. Now, regarding Executive Order 2019 and what that means for April 10th to May 4th at this point, we do know that all public schools must be closed, and that means that those GED testing centers will also presumably be closed. But if you're hearing anything different, or if you know of anything different, please email me and let me know. But I just want to make sure that I'm keeping track of how everyone is doing with their GED testing centers around the state. But this is our understanding of how this is going forward. We also want to remind you you should have received an email on Tuesday about a COVID-19 and ABE programming survey. In that email, it was sent by Sherry on Tuesday afternoon. We really do want everyone to participate, everyone to complete the survey if possible, all ABE staff in your consortium. There are questions for everybody, and then there's a small subset of questions specifically for administrators and consortium managers. If you check that you're an administrator or consortium manager, those additional questions will appear. But if you check any other role, that will not. The survey overall should take less than 15 minutes. And we're going to use those results at the Department of Education and with our ABE support network to really make sure that we're tailoring and adapting our services based on your current needs. And also that we have a good sense of the pulse of what's happening within the field. There is a link to the survey in the email and also on this slide. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Astrid to walk through some of our resources and professional development. Astrid?
Yes, great. Thanks, Brad. We can go to the next slide. We want to make sure that everyone is aware of the various resources that are out there and available to support you, especially during this challenging time. So as we mentioned on our previous webinar, we have a new Schoology group that is the COVID-19 and Distance Education Resource Hub. And this group has been designed to really centralize all of the various resources that are being shared around COVID-19 and how it's impacting our Minnesota adult education programs. And this is a place where you can go to ask questions of your colleagues, ask questions of the support network providers, share resources, share things that you're doing in your programs. We had so many great ideas shared on our last webinar, and just encourage you to get into that group. There were instructions on this slide, and there were also instructions in email communication that was sent out last week to help you get onto that Schoology group and start sharing what's working and your questions with the rest of the field. We can go to the next slide. So just want to walk you through a couple of the features that you'll see in that group. When you first enter the group, the landing page is the updates page, and that is where you can post any general updates or questions that that you may have if they don't fall clearly into one of the discussion threads that we have. Also encourage you to check your notifications. So if you go to the tab in the top right-hand corner, you'll see option to receive email notifications for different types of posts. So encourage you to set those so you receive notifications when updates are posted, when people comment on your posts, so you can see when your questions get answered. And remind yourself to go back in to the Schoology group and check. And as Susan's chatting, we now have 197 members. That's excellent. And hope even more of you can get on there. Brad, if you'll go to the next slide, another feature that we have in there are our discussion boards. So if you follow along on the left-hand tab, you'll click on discussions, and we have created a number of different discussion threads around topical areas, asynchronous distance learning, synchronous distance education, free instructional resources, etc. So if you click on that particular discussion link, that will lead you to what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen. You'll see previous posts around that topic and an area where you can enter your own post. And it works in a very intuitive manner. If you've used any sort of social media, quite easy to use. So that's a place for sharing resources and discussion around particular topics. On the next slide, you'll see some more detail about how to add a discussion thread. So if you'd like to start a new discussion thread about a topic that's not already on there, you have the option to add a discussion. You click on that button and then simply create a title for your discussion and write a description, and voila, it is created. So feel free to add those for new topics. We also have resource folders where we're housing resources around particular topics. Again, you click on the folder, that will take you to the contents of the folder where you'll find a variety of links and files that people have started posting, and just really encourage you to add to those as you are creating things, as you are finding things. Let's get all of those good things up into the resource folders. If you'd like to create a new resource or add your own, you simply click on the Add Resources button, and then you have the option to create a new folder if necessary, and then options to add a variety of different kinds of tools. Probably the most frequent ones you'll want to use are adding a file or a link. So I think fairly intuitive. You can, as Brad said, download these slides and use these as a reference. If not, please feel free to contact me, or really anyone at the Atlas or distance learning team can help you get into the Schoology group and add your materials. Brad, let's go to the next slide. Also want to let you know about some various professional development opportunities that are particularly relevant right now. So one is coming up on Tuesday. GED Testing Service, as part of their GED Tuesdays for Teachers webinar series, is hosting a webinar on working at a distance. So how can you continue to help your students study for their GED test during this time? So there'll be an opportunity to talk about options for keeping students on track and sharing best practices and resources. So there's a link to registration there, and also an opportunity to register on the GEDTS website. Brad, let's go to the next slide. Also want to just update you, if you have not seen already, the events calendar. We have canceled all of the March and April events and early May in-person events. So those have either been canceled or they're being postponed until a later date. We have decided to move forward with the May 8th CCRS Instructional Leadership Summit in a virtual format. We're really excited about it. As we looked at the goals and topics, we felt like this one would lend itself well to a virtual environment. So registration for that is already open. You can head over to the Atlas page. This is a great opportunity for any of you doing work in your programs around the CCRS and supporting your colleagues. Perhaps you have a little extra planning time right now as you're maybe not seeing students as often. This is a great time to dig in and think about aligning resources and really upping your game around standards work. So encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity virtually. The Atlas staff, Brad, if you'll go to the next slide, is also looking at a variety of webinars. Go to the next slide. Because we had to cancel our regional events this spring, Atlas is looking at a number of those sessions for delivery via webinar. So stay tuned for that. A couple will definitely be around relicensure areas, topics likely to include reading, English learners, numeracy, and potentially some career pathway topics. Atlas is also going to be offering a different type of virtual opportunity, new ABE teacher virtual coffee breaks. This will be a chance to connect with colleagues and Atlas staff around a particular content area. So to come together to share how you're managing to teach reading or math or standards at a distance. So stay tuned for more information about those. We also know that our newsletter, our ABE Connect newsletter, is always a great source of information, but particularly now when everyone is learning a new normal and a lot of resources are being shared, really encourage you to read that newsletter that comes out every Tuesday, comes from Sherry Eichinger's email. If you're not getting that, there are lots of places on the Atlas website where you can register for that. Great articles in this week's newsletter around ideas for teaching and learning currently. And our colleagues at Atlas just wanted to remind you that they're there to support you. So please reach out to them. All of our support network providers are continuing to work at a distance and are there to answer questions and support you. Let's go to the next slide. Also want to mention some really relevant materials that are available through Panda. If you go to the Panda website, to the mental health resources section, there is a new section, COVID-19 mental health resource guide. So this has information about crisis line numbers, telehealth services, cell phone apps, and other mental health resources, and then a variety of other links to resources to help you and your students manage stress and anxiety during this time. Panda also has, if you go to the next slide, several different online courses that may be particularly helpful if you are wanting more information about mental health or need to meet your relicensure requirements around suicide prevention and early onset recognition of mental illness. Those are available on the Literacy Minnesota online course page. And then our colleagues at Panda are also in the process of developing some additional online or webinar mental health trainings. So stay tuned, read your newsletter. Those will be announced. And as I mentioned before, Panda staff are working and they're available for calls and emails. So please do reach out to them. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn things over to our distance learning team, support network providers from Literacy Minnesota, Tom and Susan.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
So we just have a few resources, a few updates to talk to you about today. These are just some general resources that might be helpful. A few of them we've shared before, some of them are new. There's a great new website called Tips for Distance Learning, managed by EdTech, which also hosts the IDEAL Consortium, which works with states all around the country on distance ed all the year round. They are also doing weekly webinars from 12 to 1 every Friday. I was not able to attend the last one because I had a conflict with another meeting, but I'm told that it was really a good experience. There's lots of very pertinent discussion issues. There's a link to register, and you just need to register once, and then you're automatically registered for every one that happens every Friday at noon if you're interested. And then also a link to free and low-cost internet plans if you have students that are not connected, which many of them are not. There might be a good way to help them get some services. You want to go on to the next slide?
Oh, and I'll just say that we'll make sure that those links get posted in the Schoology group as well.
Right. So a couple of words about platforms, and Susan, please chime in whenever you want to. as the state has said, we're really trying to focus strongly on serving learners, not on getting contact hours. If you get contact hours, that's fine, but that's not our primary focus right now. So we've been getting quite a lot of platforms for approval, and we're asking that you not submit requests for approval of teacher-created content, except for those that might be full courses created in LMS, because we just don't have a way at present to approve other types of teacher-generated content that will be accurate and really reflect the time that's spent doing it. It's fine to use that content when you're working with students, but just don't submit it as a platform because we can't really confirm it at this point. We are looking in the future at ways that we might be able to verify and approve teacher-created content for proxy hours, but we aren't quite there yet.
So I would recommend, if you do have ideas for other kinds of teacher-created material, to share those in the Schoology group, because that's a way that we can kind of hear about what teachers are doing without it being an official proxy hour approval process, right? Because I do want to know what people are doing, but we can't really approve it for proxy hours right now.
And then wanting to, we are getting kind of inundated with platform requests, which is really stressing the distance learning team because we are trying to do many other things in terms of providing support. We already have over 30 approved platforms. There's very complete information about all of those on the website with a filter for choosing the ones that might reflect the needs of your particular students. So please look over those before you submit a new platform, because we don't want to have a list of 75 platforms. It just doesn't make sense. Plus, as we've been saying, you don't need to have a platform approved right now to be able to use it with students. You're welcome just to go ahead and use it without any approval on our part. So if we can go on to the next slide. A couple of things about North Star I wanted to mention. We just released last night and this morning a way that you can proctor assessments online at a distance. We've had a number of requests from programs to do that. So we developed a procedure and a way to do that, released it to everybody. You should have that hopefully through your license. Everybody who has a license as a test location will get it. I'm real curious to know how that works for people. So I know there's been a lot of interest in or questions that I have heard about the possibility of administering processor tape or other tests at a distance, which as far as I know is not possible right now. So we're kind of trying to be a pioneer and figure out a way that we can at least proctor North Star assessments online. If you are using North Star Online Learning, we have Computer Basics, interactive instruction and practice for students, and that is approved for time on task proxy hours. And there's a really nifty reporting, very easy to use reporting mechanism you can download student time individually or for a group of students and then enter it into SID. We also, last week or the week before, released a new feature that you can create student accounts in the North Star LMS, which is where North Star Online Learning lives. You just upload a spreadsheet and create an account for every student that you're interested in. And once they have accounts, it'll automatically track all of the time on task work that they do and all of the assessments that they complete. So always wanting feedback on how these things are working for people, please let us know. Oh, yes, if you need help from any of us, please use the support email. A lot of us are getting individual emails, and it really makes it very slow on our part. We have a number of people on our team, and we sort of divide up general topics in terms of who replies to which kinds of questions. So when you start emailing Susan or I or Adam or whoever individually, and that's not the person assigned to deal with your kind of question, it really just slows the whole process up because we have to start forwarding emails around back and forth. So please do use the support distance learning email. It will help you and it'll help us. I think that's it. Oh, Susan, do you want to talk about the legislative platform?
Sure. So this is the same legislative platform that we talked about last week on the call that had just been approved. And so we just want to emphasize that we really do need ABE supporters out there around the state to contact their legislators and ask them to support adult basic education right now. There are so many pressing priorities facing the legislature right now, and we are a small program. It will be very easy for us to be forgotten if we don't really step up and make ourselves heard. So please do contact your state, House, and Senate representatives and ask them to support the LAN agenda, specifically to change that reporting period for this year to hold our programs harmless. That is a no cost and very simple thing for them to do. And then also we're asking for supplementary funding and for changing the growth factor. And those are going to be important so that we can scale up to meet the demand, which we know will be there because of the coming recession. So please do join with us in contacting your legislators.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Tom, for sharing both the distance learning information and the Literacy Action Network update. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jody and then Julie next after that to talk about some of our ABE grants. Jody?
Thanks, Brad. So first of all, we want to let everyone know at this point, as far as we know, due dates for some of our, currently existing grants and sources of funding have not changed. Of course, we all know we are in an uncertain time and an uncertain period, but just know at this point that those due dates are still the same. And if there are any changes, we will definitely do our best to make sure everyone is well aware of those things within plenty of time. So for now, we can move forward, assuming that our regular due dates remain the same. So I want to talk a little bit about our regular annual ABE grant application. So this is the application for annual state and federal ABE funding. That application will be due on June 1st, as it is every year. And just kind of a note about what this is, generally speaking, this application, we need to receive one of these from each consortium. It comes from the fiscal agent entity. So we have 41 consortia in the state. So probably many of you who are listening are not involved with developing and submitting this application, but maybe you should be thinking to yourself, if you don't know anything about this, be thinking about where is your program or your site situated within a consortium, and who is your leadership that is submitting this application, because it's good for you to know that. So for those of you who are working on this application or will be working on it and submitting it, we're hoping to have those grant application materials posted in serves by mid-April, which would give you about 6 weeks before the due date. And we will be providing more information and support and explanation at the grant application workshop. So some more information about that workshop on the next slide, Brad. So we did one round of this workshop at the Metro Regional a couple of weeks ago when the world was a different place. And a few things have changed since then. And we were planning to do that workshop at both the North and South regionals, but obviously those events will not be taking place. So we're adapting like everybody else in this moment. We are working on creating a recorded version of that workshop that we will put out online for you to watch. That one will not be live. It'll just be a recording, and you can go through it on your own time. In addition to that, we will let you know when that gets up, but we're shooting for mid-April to have that available to you. In addition to that, we will, on our regular quarterly web chat with MNABE on May 6th, we will go through this grant application workshop again. So that is our regularly scheduled webinar. Hopefully, possibly that is already on your calendar from before our calendars got all upended. But that will be an opportunity to hear that information and support, and that will be a live presentation where you could ask questions as we go through. So just know that more information is coming about the annual application. This is not the only time or place where you will receive information about that. If you go on to the next slide, Brad. There is, however, one thing to note that we just want to give you a heads up about. And again, this isn't the last time you'll hear it, but one thing to note about the annual application this year. And that is about Table A. So just for background, Table A is included in the annual application every year. It's where the consortia reports out the number of students and the number of contact hours for the previous contact hour period. And then we at MDE, we use the hours reported on Table A to calculate how state and federal funding gets distributed for the following fiscal year. So that happens every year, but there will be a little bit of a difference this year. So for this year, in the annual application, there will be that regular Table A, like there always is, and in addition, there will be a table that we're going to call A1, which will be contact hours and students reported on this different contact hour reporting period. As you heard Susan and Tom talking about, Literacy Action Network is doing advocacy at the legislative level to shift our reporting period for those contact hours so that we can use your contact hours from before this current crisis in order to calculate state and federal aid for next year. So at this point, what we're going to need in the annual application is both counts, both your regular May 1 to April 30 count, and then this different adjusted count from March 14th to March 30th. So, and Brad, if you can go on to the next slide, I just included one image here on how you can do that in SID. So when you look in SID, you can see Table A. And when you pull that table in SID, it will default to our regular contact hour reporting period, which is May 1 to April 30th, but you can change those dates. So that's what you will need to do when pulling that data for the annual application, is to run that report from SID with different dates in order to be able to fill in all that information. So just in summary, that's basically just, giving you a heads up, letting you know that that's a change about the annual application this year. But please do plan, for those of you who are responsible for putting together and submitting this application, please be watching for additional information from our office about that workshop that you can, hear more and learn more about this application.
At this point then, thank you, Jody. We are going to turn it over to Julie Dinkow from our team to talk a little bit more about some of our other grants. Julie, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. In regards to the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grants, I just want to remind everyone that the in-person site visits have been canceled at least through the end of May. I'm currently considering possible virtual visits that I know will not include like classroom observations, but it might be more just working with the administrators or the teachers that have done the programming or will be doing the programming. Just a reminder to continue to program as much as you can possibly program, knowing that it's distance education and distance learning. And if all the funds are not spent, this will not impact your grant that will be beginning this upcoming year in July. There is a grant requirement that you meet. Actually, it's not a requirement, that you're supposed to meet the targets you wrote in the RFP. But considering our current situation, we're not going to hold individuals to those targets at this point in time. So do plan on moving forward with your integrated English literacy and civics education grants. Okay, next. As far as the regional transitions plans go, please continue to do the activities that were written in the plan for this year. Again, if it's not possible to do those activities, you can rework the activities. You can come up with different transitions related activities to do during this time. When you do this, you need to document the changes on the final page of the transitions plan and then just send that in to me. A reminder on both the civics grants and the transitions plans, the regional transitions plans, if the funding isn't spent in those two opportunities, we still are able to capture that within the adult basic education system and redistribute those funds the following year. So it's not like we will be losing this funding. That's just so all of you are aware of that. Next slide. As far as partner updates, I have been trying to keep you posted on what's been going on with our other state partners like DEED, the Department of Human Services, Office of Refugees and Immigrants. So just a few things. I sent an email out yesterday. As far as developmental education in the Minnesota state system, one of their concerns that has kind of risen to the top is that they're not able to proctor the AccuPlacer from a distance. They're working on it. They can do it, but it costs $20 per test to do that. So they're trying to figure out a way that they can still do that. There was guidance sent out from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, employment and training, and I believe some ABE providers do work with SNAP ENT. And this was just a reminder to review those recommendations and let people know that there are services still available to individuals who were participating in that program. I haven't received detailed guidance from DEED yet regarding the Pathways to Prosperity grants. As soon as I receive more detail around that, I will send it out. I did include a message from Hamza Warfa at DEED, who was saying they support their nonprofits and community-based organizations. So I'm imagining something might be in the future around somehow still trying to use the grants to do some work supporting learners. I also sent out a career force attachment that shows which career force centers were still open. That was as of yesterday, and which ones were closed. That's probably updated now or will be on Friday to show most of them closing. But please keep in mind they do offer a lot of virtual services for students. So you can use that as a resource. There are still some things that are up in the air yet, like Minnesota Family Investment Program and what should participants do to fulfill their employment plans. And a lot of times that included referring them to English language classes. They're looking at the federal law that went into place, and they're still trying to determine how that might work out. And then I'll just keep everyone posted as soon as I get the information and try to get that out to you as fast as possible. And that's it. Brad?
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. And so at this point, we are going to quickly turn it over. We're running a little ahead of schedule So we're going to take some questions right now via the chat. And Julie, the first one is actually for you that I saw in the chat here. It was a question from Meg about transitions plans. And she's asking if they're making changes to their plan. Do those changes to the transitions plans need approval from our office?
If they're over $2,000, please do send it in so that we can approve it. But if it's under, even if it's over or under, please do document the change. As I mentioned on the last page of the transitions plan, there is a place where you can document the changes. So over 2,000, yes, please send it in. Under 2,000, you can do that regionally and decide on what changes you want to make.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification, Julie.
Yep.
So for those that have questions now, you can either click to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can raise your hand or raise your question over the phone through the webinar by voice, or you can chat in your question as well. So let's start. We have a hand raised here. I can't see the hand raised. Okay. Oh, now there's a hand raised. Andy Albee, I'm unmuting you. You need to unmute yourself. It looks like you've done that. What's your question?
Fred, I started to put it into the chat, and then you said we could do it out on voice. The MNGED 30 account I know was getting low in funds prior to this occurring. If we have students who had registered for the GED test has now been canceled, and then they reschedule later, what happens if those funds are gone?
Good question. So as of the end of February, we had used, oh goodness, I'm trying to think of the exact amount, but I want to say it was about 70 to 75% of those of the subsidy. And so if a test session has been canceled, then that means that money gets freed up. I feel like I might need to ask Jim and or Melissa to kind of help with this. But Jim, your hand is raised. I'm going to unmute you. I unmuted you. You're also self-muted. My understanding, though, Andy, is that money, there is still some available, and right now no one is actually using the funds because a lot
Correct.
of testing is canceled. So so that means that the money might last until the end of this fiscal year. Jim, you're currently self-muted. If you can see the microphone next to your name and click on that to unmute yourself, then you can talk. Yeah, because originally, Andy, I know that we thought that that the money was going to run out any day here now, and now it looks like it might last a little longer. Jim, you're online now.
I am online. So yes, I think the monies are going to last quite a bit longer now. I'll say, unfortunately, our testing volume statewide is down quite a bit. So I don't think that there's going to be any problem. We'll keep Brad informed and as we go along, but again, unfortunately, the testing volume's down. The good side would be that the funding should last, maybe even into June.
Yep. So thank you for that confirmation, Jim.
And Brad, GED related, we had a couple of requests for the registration link for the GED Tuesdays for Teachers webinar on supporting students at a distance. I just put that in the chat. And if you want to reference it later, you can get that link from the slides that are in the materials section.
Yep, and I would also say if you're a member of the Schoology group, the COVID-19 and Distance Education Resource Hub, if you look in the main page there, we've also put that link to register for that webinar there as well. So you can find Tuesdays for Teachers in a lot of different places. I'm glad to hear there's a lot of interest in that. And Astrid, thank you for putting the webinar registration code in the chat.
Yes.
I'm going to call on Lee Obermiller. Lee, I have unmuted you. If you want to unmute yourself, click on the little microphone next to your name on the attendee list, and you should be able to, or to the on the left-hand side of that.
Brad?
Yep, I can hear you, Lee.
I unmuted myself. That may be a first in life. But in terms of the GED and the vouchers, I was worked on that Tuesday directly with Pearson VUE, and I don't know if I think this is germane to that conversation. I was assured at that time that if you close the session, those students would be reimbursed. And I'm assuming, and they said that also included the voucher. My concern was that it's my understanding that a voucher could only be used once by a student for a test. That should not hold then in that case if your site was closed. So those vouchers should be good again for those students. Did that make sense?
Correct, and that's a good clarification. So if the student just doesn't show up for testing, if it's a no-show, that would count against that student unless that student or that tester raised an issue later and that was reimbursed. But generally that would be counted as a no-show, and then the student couldn't use that code, the MNGED 30 code again for that test. However, if the site, the testing center shuts down or cancels testing, then the student could use that MNGED 30 code again once testing is up and running.
Thank you.
Yep, excellent clarification. Thank you, Lee.
Yep.
And good to hear your voice too.
Yeah, back at you, guy.
Astrid, can you help me with the chat questions? I'm kind of trying to figure out where to go.
Yep. Jody or Todd, do you want to speak to the date difference in table A1 and the legislative language?
Sure. So we had a little discussion ahead of time whether anyone would catch those little date differences on these slides, and you guys are on the ball and you caught it. So the reason there is the discrepancy you noticed is because there are, this legislative effort is coming from a couple of different directions. LAN is advocating. There's also some advocacy coming up through MDE as an agency. And we think that there may be actually two versions out there, that are like one date apart from each other. So please just be, if you are involved in submitting that annual application and putting together table A for your consortium, please just be paying attention to our additional guidance in the workshop and those materials. Once they are posted on the MDE website, we'll make sure that it's clear in the application itself what dates you need to use. It will be one of the two alternatives that you've seen on slides today. It'll definitely be mid-March dates, but we'll make sure that's clear to you by the time you need to be filling out those forms.
Great, thanks, Jody. We've also had a number of questions and chats regarding the use of Zoom for instruction. Someone asking about the possibility of a statewide Zoom account, and others sharing and reminding us that Zoom does have free service available currently. And I wonder if Susan or someone from the DL team wants to say anything else additionally about Zoom.
I personally have not used Zoom very much, but I know that it is being very heavily used across a lot of educational systems, and they have lifted the 40-minute limit for educators, at least at this time. Also, if that system isn't your preference and you want to look for other options, Google Meet is also offering the professional version for free right now. So those are two good options. And there are lots of other video calling tools out there, and we have included a Google Doc in the Schoology group that kind of breaks down a lot of the different calling apps that are out there with some pros and cons and instructional information on how to use each one of them. So that's in the Schoology group, and you can check out all those resources there.
This is Julie, and I would just add that I think Zoom is very user-friendly. In Minnesota State, that is their statewide system for using those. And if you have an email address that is a school district address, you can go beyond the 40 minutes with the free Zoom access. Otherwise, it's still 40 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh, and there was
Excellent.
one other chat in the chat log about a school district asking teachers not to use Zoom. And I have seen that also in some groups that I am involved with on technology integration in school districts. There are some privacy concerns around Zoom. Some school districts are thinking that perhaps it doesn't meet the privacy protection requirements that they have for kids. Now, that may not be as applicable for us since we're working with adults. But yes, it is possible that you will get instructions from your K-12 school district not to use Zoom. And if you do that, then I would recommend trying Google Meet instead.
Thank you for that clarification, Susan. We had another question from Caroline, and she asked a hypothetical question that someone wanted her to ask. What happens if a staff person, like a teacher, runs out of work to do during this time, meaning they can't reach the hours they're due in their contract or work assignments? Todd, I'm wondering if you could kind of kickstart our answer to this question.
Sure, thanks, Brad. I think the answer to that is that we anticipate, so I think we've been really clear with folks that first of all, your appropriation for this fiscal year is already in place. Those monies are committed to your consortium, and that you can really use those funds both to provide direct service to students, and we're encouraging folks to do as much of that as possible and be as creative as possible in doing that at a distance. But the second is you can also use the funds to work on building capacity. And that could be, trying to bring additional distance ed resources online over the course of the next several weeks. It could be working on building capacity a little bit further out. But I think our assumption would be that there is no ABE program out there that is so perfectly resourced or set up in terms of instructional capacity that there aren't lots of things folks could be doing to actually build that instructional capacity. And so I guess it would be my hope that teachers who were not providing instruction would be spending their time on building instructional capacity.
Todd, this is Astrid. I would agree that this would be a great opportunity if someone is not able to have much student contact time to do some curriculum or course development. And there are a variety of resources for doing that on the Atlas website. If you're looking at the development of career pathway courses, there is an excellent tool for course design that you can access.
And to be very clear, adding on or just reemphasizing what both of you are saying, and it's about building the ABE program's capacity, not community eds or the K-12 sides or any other entities. It's really about building the ABE program capacity, and the staff really should be working towards that in whatever way possible.
Yeah, Brett, thank you for reinforcing that, and Astrid also for that suggestion. I'm amazed by the resources that are out there through our support network, through national efforts that are going on, the guidance coming from our distance ed team, both here in Minnesota and folks who work in distance ed at the national level. Really, in some ways, if you have staff who have a little bit of time, these are resources that are often hard for us to fully take advantage of because we just don't have enough time to do it. And so in a way, this presents potentially an opportunity to really become familiar with those resources and make effective use of them.
Yes, and I'll just reiterate something that Patsy put in the chat. This is also a great time to do some of the crucial professional development, foundational professional development around our standards. So both the CCRS and ACES Foundations courses, for example, are available online, and you can access those via the Atlas website. And I'll put a link in the chat here in just a minute to our ABE Adult Education PD catalog, where you can look for a variety of opportunities, many of which are accessible online. So that would be another great use of someone's time.
And if I could just kind of do a shout out too, looking ahead, you know, they are predicting a recession after all this is over. So now might be a good time to build those relationships with employers in your area. Look into a union, work, apprenticeships, other things that adult learners where we can connect and train for the workforce.
Those are great suggestions, Julie. Thank you for adding those.
Yeah.
So I think bottom line for us is we think there is just lots of opportunity for staff who aren't providing direct service to be exploring all the different possibilities that have been mentioned.
Excellent. Thank you. Astrid, other questions in here? I know there was some conversation in the chat about what Google Meet was and how that compared to Google Hangouts, and that Google Meets was more of a professional version of Google Hangouts, and then thankfully Allison Wilcox sent in some guidance about using or sharing Google Meet information with students who may not have a Google account. And she said that you do not need a Google account to get invited and onto a Google Meet. However, it is best to copy and paste the meeting details into the body of an email and send it directly to students so they have the link to click and join the Google Meet instead of inviting them through the website or through the app. And then that connects through meet.google.com. No app is needed. Otherwise, the invite to students can, with non-Gmail accounts, can sometimes go to spam. That was a helpful suggestion or tip.
Thanks, Brad. And then Elizabeth mentions that she's put some resources for using Google Meet on our new Schoology group. So head over there and see what she's shared.
Excellent.
And Susan also mentions that this is also a good time to be taking some of your resources and using them to build a course in a learning management system like Schoology.
Great idea. Okay. Any other
questions at this time?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any as well. People can still continue to chat in your questions, but I did want to share just a little bit, or here as well, have some discussion about not just the questions that you're facing, but what are some of the great things that you're seeing right now? What are some positive practices that you are exploring or seeing with your programming? And if you want to share that as well, that would be great. So Christine Kelly was just sharing with us that she knows that Sherry Bruins and Jill Rivard they posted examples of Google Class in the new Schoology group. So that's great. If you want to see that great idea, you should log into the Schoology group. Oh, they shared their program websites, not their classes. That's a good clarification. We also did get a question from Kathleen Moriarty. Is there a way to collect student contact hours from Google Classroom offerings? Susan, I'm hoping you can help us answer this.
So not at this time, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because, you know, it's a really great service to offer to your students. If you did build out an entire course on a platform like Schoology or Google Classroom, and you went through and you documented your standards alignment, and you had a good notion of how long each unit would last, and you would know how many proxy hours that would be worth, and you would be willing and able to share that with other teachers in the state so they could make use of it, then you could send it in as an approval or through the application approval for proxy hours, and we would take a look at it, and we would review it the same way we would review any other curriculum that's submitted that would be created by a publisher. But obviously that takes a lot of time to build out something that robust and to have it well aligned and all the documentation in place. So don't just, send us things that aren't really clearly defined like that, because we won't be able to approve it. But it could be done if you and your staff put a lot of effort into it.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. So Emily is sharing that, well, maybe I'll start with Jill. Jill Rivard is saying that hers is a Google site. She wanted to do Google Classroom, but found out that students needed a school email to use the Google Classroom. And Emily Watt shared that they have a number of students pre-teaching Google Meets to students this week to prep for online classes starting next week. And they even have students finishing their homework early, and not just finishing it, but finishing it early. That's excellent. And Kathleen was clarifying that what Jill was saying, that when Jill was saying they needed to have a school account, Kathleen has found that their students just need to have a Gmail account, not necessarily a district domain account. So there's some differences that some programs are seeing. Any other positive practices or ideas?
Oregon's sharing some success they are having using WhatsApp. Their beginning level teachers were having trouble contacting students and have had a lot of luck by using WhatsApp. And students were already familiar with it, and so they're using that to share class websites and other resources.
Excellent. Emily's saying that they're locally trying to collect some best practices for the future, like making sure that all of their teachers use Remind in regular times and get emails for all of the students. So this is kind of helping people prep for kind of future programming and when we go back to quote unquote normal or regular schedules. Jill Rivard saying that they're working with the county jail to do some Skype classes during the shutdown.
Julie's finding that students are very receptive to doing online learning, and staff are learning a lot and becoming savvy with a variety of different tools. So that's exciting. And then Christine mentions that there is something in the G Suite admin settings for schools, and that person can decide if the school email or any Gmail can be used to access Google Classroom.
That's a good clarification.
Erin's collaborating with another ABE site and a community partner on an awesome grant. That's good to hear.
Yeah. Patsy's saying that Andrea Eckelberger and she are working on collecting ways to keep in touch and deliver instruction to lower level ESL, which is a particularly difficult group to reach right now. So she said, stay tuned in the COVID-19 and distance education resource hub Schoology sites. That'll be exciting to see.
Brad, this is Todd. Could I just add that, Emily's thinking ahead in terms of putting in place practices that will be helpful in the future, I think is really important, because it is, as I understand it, definitely within the realm of possibility that even if we get an easing from the pandemic in the near-term future, that it's possible we would have other closings at future dates, for example, say in the fall sometime. And so everything we're learning as we gear up this time, we need to keep ready to go in our toolkit in the event that we need it again at some time in the future.
That's true. Yep.
Good point,
Thank you,
Tom.
Todd.
Good point,
Thank
Tom.
you, Todd. Sherry Bruin, what they've been doing at in Glacial Lakes, she created a form, a Google form for teachers to share notes about the contact that they're making with students. What's great about this is it has all of the responses or action items on one spreadsheet then whenever someone fills that out. And if anyone wants to see what that form looks like, she's happy to share it. So you can reach out to Sherry to see more about that. And Sarah Pratt was saying that there's a closer collaboration with social service provider side of Hmong American Partnership, SNAP, census outreach, unemployment insurance, MNsure. So that sounds like a lot of partnering happening there.
Emily says that their QComp work is going to be continuing online for the month of April. So they're going to be doing their PLC work online.
Yep. So Kathy Linder asked an interesting question. Is anyone concerned that students will really enjoy this working from home, the exciting, innovative ideas that you're implementing? Will this negatively affect our attendance once school resumes with in-person programming? It's an interesting question. You know, I know we're happy that if students are learning, that's the most important piece, and the best format that works for them. I mean, that also is great, but that would be an interesting side effect.
Yeah, Brad, this is Todd. It is an interesting thing to ponder. I really think that my hope is that our experience to date has been that we have found in cases where students both have direct in-person instruction and additional instruction and resources that they're interacting with online, that in many ways for adult learners is the best of both worlds. And so my hope would be that our experience during these weeks really builds our capacity to provide education at a distance. When our doors are open, we do have students returning, and I suspect actually, given the likelihood of a fairly deep recession, that's quite likely to happen. And but we will be in a much better position to provide even more intensive programming for folks by having both in-person and distance ed options much more widely available than we have in the past. So I actually view it as a really an opportunity to really build our distance ed skills and continue to use those to expand programming, increase the intensity of programming as we go forward.
Absolutely. And Andy Albee was saying that he was wondering, even once schools are able to reopen, maybe some students would be reluctant to return for health reasons or other reasons, and DL can still help to provide some services. And then I was going to say as well, Allison also offered that maybe this would be a great opportunity to offer more hybrid programming in the future, some in person and some distance education combined.
Hey, Brad, this is Tom. Just want to remind people that a lot of our students do not have good internet access, and especially right now with the libraries closed and other places where they sometimes are able to get access. So I think all the DL stuff, of course, is wonderful, but I just want to be sure that everyone knows that no matter how much we develop it, there are a fairly large number of our students who, at least right now, aren't really able to benefit from online DL because they don't have very good internet access.
Okay. Yep, and that's really important to know as well, to highlight that issue. Absolutely.
In addition to that, I would also add that many of our students are, of course, parents of school-age children who are now also home and expected to do distance learning. So even if they do have a computer and an internet connection, it's probably being taken up by the kids, which you can understand why that's the priority. So many of our students are going to have less access now than they would normally. So just keep that in mind, that low bandwidth, asynchronous ways of meeting with people or things that they can do on their phones may be the best option.
Absolutely. Good point, Susan.
One of the ways that National Digital Inclusion Alliance thinks about access is that it's a tripod that relies on three things. And those include, practical skills, access to internet, and the equipment needed. So if those three things are not in place, it's really hard for people. So just things to be talking about with your students, perhaps.
True. Good idea, Tom. I was going to also follow up with Sherry Bruin's got so many requests for her Google form that she realized, she just needs to put a link to it in the chat. So if you see in the chat, she put a link to her Google form that she created to check where staff are documenting when they're checking in with students. It's also important to know that she's going to post that same link in that Google form in the Schoology group as well, so you can find it there. A lot of people are chatting great ideas and bouncing ideas off one another in the chat. Anything, Astrid, you want to reinforce or shout out?
I think we've covered most of the new ideas that people have shared. Just again, encourage people to continue the communication on the Schoology site.
Absolutely. That's the best place to share ongoing best practices will be the Schoology site. We do have a hand up. Lee has his hand up. Lee, you're self-muted if you want to unmute yourself again.
Brad, one question. I was on Schoology on another window on my computer, and there's not a third group on there yet. And I understood it that there would be a third group to join that deals with these issues.
There is a specific group in Schoology called the COVID-19 and Distance Education Resource Hub. Astrid, it's in the slides, right? If I go back to slides?
Yeah, if you want to go back to that page, Lee, you'll need to join that group, and in order to do that, you'll need to follow the instructions on the slide here. So once you're in Schoology, Brady, if you want to go back even further, all the way back, you'll need to click on My Groups.
Okay, that's what I did. Okay.
Join a group, and then you'll need to enter that access code.
I will try it again. It's probably something very simple that I missed. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Patsy put the code in the chat as well. And Marissa's got a link to the instructions in the newsletter. Everybody.
Everyone is extremely supportive and helpful.
Yes. Great. Okay. Well, we'll continue our conversations.
Absolutely. And that brings me to, sorry, there's not a more fluid way to do this, but I was going to also make sure everyone knew about our next check-in webinar. We are going to have our next webinar on Friday, April 3rd, so a week from tomorrow. And instead of the afternoon, we're going to try the morning, 10 o'clock to 11:30 in the morning. If you download the slides, you can see where it says register here. There's a link to register for the webinar. Anything you were going to add, Astrid? Sorry.
Just Sarah chatted in. She was having trouble joining the group. We have had several people with various groups run into issues, just a couple of common troubleshooting things. Make sure that you are registered with an instructor account. Also make sure that you're trying to join a group and not a course. And if you're still not able to get in, feel free to send me an email and we'll do some troubleshooting.
Thank you, Astrid.
And then there's a request from Andy to Sherry to share the link to the actual file for her online Google form rather than just the fillable form. Mag is wondering how quickly the webinar recordings are available. Usually those are up within a day. Another person asking about saving the chats. The chat log should automatically save onto your computer. If you're using a computer, into your documents, you can find it there.
Actually, that's just for organizers, Astrid. Participants don't get a copy of the chat log.
Really? Okay.
So if you want to post one, you could upload it. It downloads as a PDF, as you know, for yourself. You could add to the website if it's helpful to you.
Okay. Getting multiple requests for the chat log, so yes, we can post that.
Okay.
Where did you see Tracy's comment that the link doesn't work in the handouts for the next meeting?
Really? Okay. Well, we'll have to fix that then.
Yep. We'll be sending out an email reminder about that webinar, and it will also, within a couple days, be on the Atlas events calendar. So thanks so very much for joining us today, everybody. We can stick around for a couple minutes in case there are any remaining questions. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you next Friday.